Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Hey Gwilym, it's been a week or two since we've done a podcast, so welcome back, if that's the right thing to say.
Well, I've been away, but I've had a holiday.
You have, haven't you? Yeah, where have you been?
I
know where you've been, but for the listeners, where have you been?
Hi, listeners. I went to Hong Kong and Vietnam.
Sounds really, really good. And you had a proper break, didn't you? Bit of downtime?
Yeah, definitely from work. I didn't really think through taking a 2-year-old to Vietnam. It was fun. Went to a cocoa farm. Had a car crash.
You've not told me that bit.
Oh, I think it's a daily occurrence. It was just a car crash. The other car just drove off, and our driver just kept driving, and that was that. But it was over here we qualified as a fairly decent crunch. That was quite cool. And then stayed in Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, for just one night. But that place is fantastic. So it was really, really cool. But again, with a 2-year-old, didn't think that through.
Yeah, it's I remember holidaying when the girls were young. I remember the first time we went on holiday, we got really, really excited about it. And just as we were getting on the plane, the day before we were getting on the plane, Evie, who's my youngest daughter, would have been 4 or 5, very, very nervous about flying. And she just complained that her side itched a little bit, and she had a couple of spots there. Took her to a chemist, and the chemist said, "Oh, looks like she's got a little bit of eczema or something. Take this cream." By the time we landed, she had full-blown childhood shingles. Now you try. We were on one of the Greek islands. I can't remember which it was, and we were in one of these kind of resort places. You try and find a doctor who knows anything about childhood shingles in a sort of an environment like that. But fair play to the on-site doc. He was really, really good. You like this? I think I might have told you the story before. It's worth telling. So he did a lot of research. We had spoken to our doctor back home. They had diagnosed it as childhood shingles. Just get a load of Zavirax cream until she gets back was basically the help that we were offered. So the doctor chucked me in his car. We couldn't get Zavirax cream other than going to multiple pharmacies. So he was driving me around this Greek island, dropping me off at pharmacies. And when I would go in there, invariably, the person behind the counter would come out and say, "English man with herpes." So that was how my holiday went.
Yeah, we had to try and translate hand, foot, and mouth into Vietnamese in the village called.
Oh, you said, yeah.
Whoa. And
yeah.
They basically said, "You need to go to the hospital immediately." And we're thinking, it's not that bad. We think they thought she had monkeypox. So,
no.
Yeah, it was fun though. It's great to get away. Great to be back.
Right, it's great to have you back. Shall we crack on with the podcast?
Yeah.
So we've got Rachel and Jet with us today to talk about Snapdragon IP, which I think we'll let them tell their story, shall we? Who's going to go first? Rachel, would it make sense for you to go first?
Great. Very happy to. Thank you so much for inviting us along. Very excited and slightly nervous to be here, but it's great to be here. I'm Rachel Jones. I'm the founder and former CEO of Snapdragon Monitoring, and we fight fakes online. That's my one-line intro.
Fight fakes online?
Yes. All online threats, but fighting fakes is how we started.
That sounds something that's interesting to explain. Jet, what about you? Who are you?
Hi, great to meet you. So my name is Jet. I have worked with Rachel at Snapdragon since the beginning of the business, which was 10 years old this week. So we, as Rachel said, we fight fakes online. So I'm really passionate about online brand protection, and that's helping brands detect infringements of their intellectual property rights online on the online marketplaces, social media platforms, domains, websites, and using the intellectual property rights that they have available to shut down infringing content.
Makes sense, I think, but we'll find out exactly how much sense it makes. So you have an interesting origin story, don't you, Rachel?
We do, yes. So I have always been passionate about IP, particularly about trademarks, but only because when I used to work in marketing many moons ago, I always thought people's trademark portfolios were really interesting. And 20 or so odd years ago, I invented a baby product, only because life was difficult out and about with a baby. Hadn't got as far as Vietnam, but was doing quite a bit of traveling. Every time I went into a cafe, somebody hauled a miserably filthy high chair out of the downstairs loo, and I didn't want to use it. So I would take off my jumper and tie my daughter into an adult chair using the jumper. And I just thought, this is nuts, but this is the only way to actually have a life, which I felt was incredibly important. So one very grim day, after a horrible experience with a grubby high chair, I chopped up my wedding dress and turned it into what became the tot seat, which is a large nappy type affair which anchors a baby safely in any adult chair when you're out and about. It adjusts for any shape or size of chair. And I decided to take it to market, and to take it to market I did, and it did really well. And I ended up leaving my other job and setting up this tot seat business. And the tot seat did very well. We're selling John Lewis boots and places like that in 50 countries around the world. And as I was going along, I thought, well, I like trademarks, so I'll register my trademarks. So I did that, and I got design rights as I was going along. Thought that might be a good thing to do. Thought I would be copied by the high street chains, and was. So that was the first infringement of IP I came across. And then as we went into our 52nd export territory, I think it was, a counterfeit was seized at Southampton by my friends at HMRC Border Control, and I was enraged. But in a way, it was good that it was seized, because then I wouldn't have known about the counterfeits otherwise. And I had registered the tot seat with what used to be Cytex, is now the IPEC portal, in terms of being able to register products for movement around Europe. And so on the registration form, it said that tot seats moved around in LCL containers of 3,000 units a pop, and this was a box of 36 that had come in, and an eagle-eyed officer had spotted them. And the bottom just fell out of my world. I was just horrified, absolutely horrified. I mean, I knew when high street chains make a copy, it's theirs, and you know they've made it properly, and it's a copy, and it's infringing your IP, and you can do something about it. But actually, a counterfeit, it was horrible. I actually have one here, which is no use for the listeners, but it's helpful for you to see. So we have a genuine one and a fake. And as you can see,
that's an absolute copy, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even from the packaging, it's really difficult to tell the difference. And when the fake arrived in the office, put it on the table, and hardly anybody could tell the difference. The board couldn't tell the difference. The copy was very good, but where had it been made? How safe was it? What chemicals were in the counterfeit? All that kind of thing. So I was just furious, absolutely furious. So within 2 weeks, I'd found a couple of willing students from Edinburgh University Business School to help me identify the fakes online, which were on the Alibaba platform, got as many offline as we could. I had met Jet, who at that point was looking for a role, having graduated in law and terrorism studies, and was interested in fakes, said, come on, let's go to China. And we were on a plane, and we went to China, literally went to Alibaba in Guangzhou, and we sat in the meeting room in the queue to the meeting room until they would see us. And it was like the scene from a bad film, really. But they did see us, and they taught us how to use IP to take infringements offline. And we said to them, look, SMEs are as affected by fakes as luxury product, which wasn't necessarily what they were used to. And thus began the story of Snapdragon.
And I guess, I'm sure Gwilym's got some questions to ask, but I guess alongside the devastation of having IP infringed and discovering there are counterfeits, there's also potential just reputational damage, isn't there? Because if you've got goods out there which purport to be yours but aren't of the same quality and are potentially injurious, then all of that can bite back on you.
Well, that was my absolute concern. I mean, with a baby product as well. I mean, I just couldn't afford for somebody to buy a fake and have a horrible experience with it. And, babies, somebody could easily have got hurt. So it was the kind of health and safety fear that was driving me to do something about it. I just wasn't going to have it. I just wasn't going to have it. And so once Jet and I had learned as much as we could from Alibaba, I resolved to come back, raise money, build tech, build a team, and provide a service so nobody else would go through the same hell that I'd gone through, in a nutshell.
Yeah, because with counterfeiting, I mean, people tend to sometimes maybe trivialize it a bit. It's football shirts and dodgy Rolexes, which carry their own cons, don't get me wrong. But I think people forget that counterfeiting often is really quite... I mean, the other two of the scary ones I hear about are obviously pharmaceuticals, terrifying, and aeroplane parts. That's... It is. So I think it's important that people realise it's not just a way of getting a cheap football shirt. It's actually pretty horrific sometimes. And I was going to ask, I mean, so HMRC stepped in. Out of interest, how does that work? How did you find that?
Absolutely fantastic. I couldn't recommend them highly enough, which is not what a lot of people say about HMRC, but I've had nothing but fantastic experiences with the border force team, to be perfectly honest. Honestly, they're great. I mean, I think it's very difficult for border force, isn't it? They're very under-resourced, like every other bit of anybody involved in policing intellectual property crime, and not a lot of containers are inspected when they move around, and they have to look for people and armaments and drugs before they look for intellectual property infringing product. But if you do go through the process by filling out the right forms and making sure that your product is on that list of things that they need to look out for, then you may be lucky, and they will find them, and then you can have your product seized and you can do something about it. So I think it's really important that it's free to do. And you can do the European one, and that it translates it all into vast number of languages for every European port, and it's all free, and it's just in your best interest if you have a product that's moving around to do that.
How do they remember it all?
Well, I suppose they have a system, so it's a brilliantly organized computerized system. And I guess when they have stuff coming in, they probably put the description in, and it might flag something up that would be in it, like a database. So it'll be a really super efficient database, which I haven't gone into the nitty gritty of how it works.
And in the UK, there are agencies like the Anti-Counterfeiting Group. So they'll run regular, they call them IP roadshows, where they invite members from Border Force to meet brands themselves, and they talk in person, and they run them through examples of real and fake, and they provide them with fact sheets and all sorts of helpful tools and tips. So the more invested the brand is in assisting them with that information, the more likely they're going to be to spot infringements when they occur. And we can leave some links if helpful. I don't know if you have notes in the podcast on the podcast,
Yeah,
but we can put some helpful links. There's the UK application for action, the equivalent in the EU, and then there's one for the US as well.
Was something like top seat, is that kind of eminently counterfeitable? Was it in the sweet spot, as it were?
Well, I'm afraid nowadays everything's in the sweet spot for being counterfeited. It's a cloth product, it's a fabric product, so really very, very easy to copy. But isn't everything now? I mean, everything from toothpaste to ball bearings. We see it all the time and absolutely every single day. I was just a bit taken aback that something as basic as a baby product would be ripped off. But we see it all the time with crowdfunding products. People have wonderful ideas and they go online with them to crowdfund. And sadly, frequently, before the product gets to market, the counterfeit gets to market, because they get masses of traction online. People think it's a great idea. It is a really great idea. But counterfeiters have sophisticated and complex manufacturing and supply and distribution chains, and they can be very efficient.
Quick legal question. So when you pick up your counterfeiter, which rights are you relying on? Is it principally IP, or are there other rights you can lean on as well?
We use IP rights. Jet, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, so at Snapdragon, we're relying on intellectual property rights. So we use notice and takedown systems that are available to report infringement, and we're reporting infringement to the platform or to whoever's hosting the content. So we're not liaising directly with the sellers. We're not getting into that kind of battle. We're reporting the content to the host. So we're using all sorts of intellectual property rights, trademarks, copyright, designs, patents, but in the main, intellectual property. Sometimes there's the opportunity to liaise with the platform if there's issues around safety, and then they will potentially intervene. But it's quite difficult, because then you might have to prove that the product is unsafe. So that might require some testing. So then who takes on the expense of doing that? But yeah, in general, it's intellectual property rights.
You mentioned platforms there. I mean, is that, if you kind of nail the major online platforms, does that deal with, is that kind of an 80-20 thing where you get enough of it to stop the problem? Or
I mean, it's really about trying to address our clients' pain points. So where are their biggest pain points? It might just be on key platforms that are competing with their own sales. It might be looking at wholesale marketplaces in order to kind of deal with the problem at source and the hope that there'll be a trickle-down effect. It might be that they want to shut down clone fake websites that have been set up to kind of scam people out of their personal contact details or financial details. So it really depends on what's the biggest threat to the brand. Is it financial? Is it reputational? If there's concerns around the manufacturing process, because sometimes we might find that counterfeit products are manufactured in really unsavory conditions. There might be child labor, slave labor, there might be environmental pollution. So then it becomes important to kind of locate the source of the problem so that our clients can go in with perhaps some offline action in terms of litigation or shutting down a factory. So it's really looking at where the biggest pain points are. It's very difficult for a brand, any brand of any size, to address all of these problems. So it's usually about prioritizing their issues.
Just on sorry, I'm supposed to be on the podcast. I'm really interested. In terms of the platforms, let's not name any names for people who don't meet the following criteria. But typically, do you find that they're very open and ready to move and have good systems in place to make sure that they can stop counterfeiting?
Some better than others, without a doubt. I won't name any names of companies that aren't doing it well, but some have put some real effort and resources into building user-friendly platforms. They have teams of well-trained people who understand intellectual property issues and take appropriate action. I think it's difficult because they need to be aware of the fact that sometimes the system is also abused. Some rights holders might be using the system to shut down competition. So we're often having to prove the infringement. So there's a lot of information that's required to prove the infringement has taken place, that our clients are indeed the owners of the intellectual property rights. We have to be very mindful that we are making a correct accusation. In the UK, we're all fearful about groundless threats, not so much in other jurisdictions, but it's really important to use these processes carefully and properly, but some are more user-friendly than others.
And the ones that are really good, it's a big resource. This is, again, interesting question. Why? Why is it important to the platforms? They're losing sales.
Yes, thankfully there's legislation that makes them take action in most jurisdictions, so they don't think they have a choice in the matter. But also they want to be seen to be selling legitimate product. It's important for them to attract brands themselves, and we've seen it with Amazon, where some brands have completely withdrawn from the platform, brands like Birkenstock, because they didn't feel that perhaps Amazon was taking appropriate action to deal with issues around counterfeits. So there can be repercussions for them if they're seen to not be doing the right thing.
Molly, shall I keep rolling?
Are you done? Are you done?
No.
Or do you want to keep? Oh, keep going. Keep going then. I mean, I've got questions, but you're on a roll, mate. I'm
on the roll. I'm going to just go sideways for a minute, and Jet, sorry for dominating you for a minute. But so that's the law side of your study. How does the terrorism come in useful?
I knew he'd go there.
Well, unfortunately, there are definitely connections between counterfeiting and terrorist organizations. Often the money involved in counterfeiting is really being used for nefarious purposes. So, to go back to the point you made earlier, people often trivialize the issue of counterfeiting, but there are, pretty significant impacts. This money is often used for lots of horrific criminal activity, including terrorism.
That's kind of one for me for a minute, at least, is about, again, a bit more philosophical. You're relying on IP laws principally, your trademarks and copyright and whatever it might be, to invoke, and obviously customs then steps up and does a great job when it's full on counterfeiting and they can spot it and everything. But you're relying on laws that, I think the most recent one's probably the Trademarks Act, which is about 1990 something. And then you've got Copyright Design and Patents Act 1988, and if you rely on the Patents Act, it's 1977. They're quite old laws. Do we need a rewrite?
Well, it's difficult because the legal framework has just not caught up with what's happening online at all. And this isn't just about intellectual property, it's happening in lots of different areas of law. And I think, a really good example of that is around deepfake pornography. It's absolutely horrific what's permitted to happen online around deepfake pornography without any legal framework to really do anything about it. And it's changing, but it's changing painfully slowly. So yes, I think if we need a rewrite of most laws when it comes to the digital space.
Sorry, just to add my tuppence worth in there, even the systems, I mean, the reasons that some of the application processes are so slow is because a patent application used to go on a boat, and it would go across the Atlantic on a boat to be looked at somewhere else. And so the timeline was all about how long the boat took to go across the Atlantic and come back again. I mean, maybe we do need an update on that kind of thing as well.
It still works like that.
Yeah, I'll follow by boat. I'm good with that. No, it's interesting, isn't it? I think there's something. I mean, I'm a patent attorney. That's my world, and there's always conversations about the 18-month publication period. That's how long it used to take to publish things, and the 1-year priority period. That's how long it used to take to travel and everything. And the 20-year patent duration. That at some point was a generation or something. I don't even know what that was for. But obviously, all these things are now well out of date. The problem, I guess, is that certainly in an area where you need international harmonization, you can't open any of these cans of worms, because you open a conversation about one thing and it opens up a whole bunch of access to medicine arguments or whatever of these things. So I guess politically it might be quite difficult to make those changes.
Yeah, I think it is, because you could make the change in the UK, but actually if you wanted to be, if the change was relevant, somewhere else in the world, then they might not have even the telecommunications speed at which to, comply with all of that. So yeah, it's an international thing, isn't it? It's not just about where we are.
And when it comes to intellectual property, that this is so relevant, because often IP is registered from one jurisdiction to the next. It's registered differently, whereas the global nature of the internet just means that jurisdictional cutoff isn't necessarily relevant, and it's a big problem. And we're seeing more and more court cases which have invited us to look at whether this system still works or not. And in terms of the work that we do, some marketplaces, some platforms are considered international. So the likes of Alibaba or AliExpress, it's possible on these platforms to enforce intellectual property rights that aren't necessarily registered in China, where the Alibaba group is based, despite the fact that a lot of the sellers are going to also be based in China. But you can actually use your intellectual property rights that are registered in the UK, say, to have content removed from those platforms, because the platform recognizes that actually a lot of their sellers are coming from all over the world, and their buyers are coming from all over the world.
So are you done, Gwilym? Is that it? Are you done for now?
For a minute,
okay. Can I have a question or two? Is that all right?
Get in.
So I think probably back to Rachel for this one. First of all, is TotSeat still a thing? Is it still a product? Are you still selling it?
Just about. It's a very wee business, and it just sells online. But yes, it ticks over. It's still a fantastic product, to be perfectly honest. So if you're traveling with a child, it's what you need.
Yeah, it's been a long time, although I am now traveling with grandchildren, so maybe I do need to.
Oh, well, maybe that's what you need then. Yes, 6 months to about 18 months.
We could have done with something like that.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Number 7 grandchild is due in January, so I'll have a little look.
Another one.
I know, Gwilym. I know. The trouble with having so many children is that they multiply then by a factor, don't they? The reason I asked Rachel is obviously there was a point in time when you realised that TotSeat was not going to be the future business for you, and Snapdragon, whatever it looked like at the time, was.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell us how that came about? When did you decide to grow this as a business?
Well, it's a really good question, and it was really thanks to the TotSeat investor that I was able to kind of what I would term as pivot, although it's quite a pivot going from manufacturing a baby product into deciding that you're going to develop tech and scale a tech business when you're a non-technical founder. So I think it really came at the point where I thought, well, we've got rid of as many fake TotSeats online as we possibly can, and with Jet joining me, we had a little pact, and we decided that if we could find enough people who would be encouraged by our finding fakes for them online and taking them offline, so kind of demonstrating that actually this was all a totally manual process at this point, but we discovered there were lots of people in the baby industry that had fakes and just weren't talking about them. And I was like, this is nuts. These are products that where somebody could get hurt. Let's talk about this issue. It's really important. It's not a victimless crime. Let's just do something about it. So we did, and we gave ourselves 3 months, and we identified enough potential clients who were happy with what we were doing. They were thrilled with what we did. And actually, some of them are still with us to that day. And at that point, I said, right, well, I'm going to try and develop Snapdragon. Went off and raised just about 4 million to do that in terms of equity investment, and built the team. And had to build a tech team, because being non-technical, no good at that. And there we are. And so now we're a team of just under 30.
Wow. So, and when you say, so just a small thing you said there, you said we identify clients. Do you identify clients by identifying them as individual brands who might be victims of counterfeiting, or do you find the counterfeits first and then go to the brands and say, look, this is happening to you, you might not know about it?
Well, in the very early days, because I was immersed in the toy and baby industry, which is quite an interesting place to be, I was just so furious that there were fakes of toy and baby products that I went to those brands and said, look, you've got issues, let me help. I totally get it. I mean, I totally get the rage, and I totally get all the issues that might happen, if somebody buys one of these fakes. Nowadays, a little bit both, but most of our clients come to us through word of mouth, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
So, one can always raise one's profile. It's nice to raise one's profile, but most people come to us through recommendation.
Without giving away any sort of like operational secrets or trade secrets, I guess you might otherwise think of them, how do you identify counterfeiting? How do you find these fake goods that are appearing online?
Jet?
Yeah, okay. So we have developed some proprietary software, which we call Swoop, and we're using a combination of search terms, and we're using search terms to go and identify infringing products. So these will be products that kind of best describe our clients' products or brands, and then our software goes off and finds those products on the various marketplaces, social media sites, and then we're using AI capabilities to sift through those hundreds of thousands of results and make sure that only the most relevant results are brought to the fore.
That sounds really sophisticated. How do the online platforms feel about being swooped?
That is a great question. Some are fabulous, and they will provide us with an API to help us.
I guess that's what I was thinking. Is that kind of the interoperability bit, isn't it, is the key?
Yeah, some do, and some actively try to block us from doing this. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And you can't tell us which do what. No, that's a terribly unfair question. Gwilym is shaking his head at me. No.
Can I say that eBay are great?
So much good stuff to do. Like, there you go.
You've identified the counterfeit. What's the first action? You have your client, the business that's working with you. You talked earlier about kind of takedowns and stuff like that. I don't actually understand how that works, I guess is what I'm saying. How do you go about that initial action of saying, hey, this is counterfeit, it's wrong, it's affecting your business, we need to do something about it?
Yeah, so we'll talk them through various processes. It's important to remember that we're not IP lawyers, so we'll often recommend that they go back and speak to their legal counsel, whether it's internal or external, about the best approach. So it might be that before anything happens, the most sensible thing to do would be to do a test purchase, so that there's that physical evidence in hand and you can do a really thorough comparison between the real product and the fake, and then decide what actions should best follow on from there. But sometimes it's the client just wants to have that product removed from sales. So then we would follow a process that's known as a notice and takedown, where we're essentially notifying the platform about our client's intellectual property rights and highlighting that there could be an overlap here between our client's IP rights and the products that are being sold online. And then the platforms take action on that basis to remove the infringing content, or perhaps remove the whole listing, depending on the IP being infringed.
Got it. So I think what I understand from that is that you're not looking to take away from the current existing legal support systems that a client might have in place, be that patent attorney, trademark attorney, solicitor, in-house legal counsel, whatever that might look like. You're adding value in terms of providing some really sort of sensitive radar technology to find out where things are happening, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
a really, really nice way to summarize it, actually. And often
That's my job on the podcast.
You should write our marketing blurbs. Often the lawyers that we work with are using our software to really gather evidence as well. What is out there, what's being sold. So it's not necessarily about moving as quickly as possible to shut down those listings. It can be an exercise in gathering intelligence so that they can then decide what best to do with that information.
So probably final question for me before I kick it back to Gwilym, if he's got any more to ask. What next? Where do you go with the business next? What other future things can you maybe develop that'll help the legal system tackle counterfeiting and fraud?
Well, you just have to be 2 steps ahead all the time, because counterfeiters and fraudsters are, cleverer and cleverer by the minute. I mean, the rise in fake domains that we saw over COVID has just been extraordinary. I mean, not just, we used to deal mainly with products, but actually increasingly since COVID, we've seen a lot of service firms being ripped off domains, as Jet mentioned earlier on. And from there, invoices go out and people pay them. And so actually that becomes a massive issue around financial fraud and stuff. So we have to continue to be very wily, on the ball, being aware of what's out there from NFT marketplaces and social media and all the rest of it, so that we can keep brands safe wherever they are in the world.
I think up until now, it's been relatively easy for us to be able to detect infringements, because infringers are often, a little bit lazy, and they'll leave some important element of a product out that enables us to detect real from fake. But I think that that's going to become more and more difficult, because now everybody's using AI, and it will be really interesting to see how that's being used to make it more difficult to detect infringements online.
Cool. Gwilym, anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, well, I was going to actually just expand a bit on that earlier reflection about how old our laws are. Just none of them built for the digital space. And actually just taking that kind of one step further. So they weren't just not built for the digital space, they also weren't built, and I think Rachel, you touched on this, they weren't built for the kind of the international nature, the cross-border nature. There's such a territorial element to all the IP rights. So there's all these problems. And as we said, going to have to change that. And in my world, standards essential patents is a brilliant example where you're trying to enforce patents in one country against telecoms. Basically, it's a global product. It doesn't really exist in one place. And so people have to kind of fiddle around with the law and make stuff up. But by the same token, I suppose the traditional legal model of it's still kind of very much grounded in the physical world, I'd say, in terms of, we think about ourselves, we're based in a country and we deal with the laws of that country. Whereas what you're kind of doing is you're kind of expanding that to almost a digital analog. Digital analog? Is that a complete contradiction? You know what I mean? You're expanding it kind of a digital version of that, where you're kind of an online law firm almost, or takedown firm, a fight fakes online firm. Sorry, I should check my notes. Do you think there's the old model of kind of having a physical location and being a physically based and physically oriented law firm may be something that we need to think about more broadly? Are you the first?
No, we're definitely not the first in terms of what we do. And in fact, I work with a law firm that I keep saying is based in Glasgow, but in fact, they're not based in Glasgow at all. There's 7 or 8 of them, and they're all in different parts of the country, and some of them are in Europe, and they do a great job. So they meet up 3 or 4 times a year, and I would use them for anything at all in terms of law, corporate law, IP, trademark registrations, all the rest of it. So they're a relatively small firm. But I mean, I think from our point of view, what matters to us and why we love working through and with IP experts and law firms is that when you're working with a law firm doing what we're doing, you get the opportunity to say, we can see there's an issue in the Philippines. Could you do something about filing some trademarks there? And that's really wonderful, because we don't do any filings like that. But we often identify that a brand that is, trying to expand its export markets has an issue somewhere else, but it needs to clear up that marketplace of the fakes before it really goes in and makes an impact. It's not really answering your question, but the internationalism of it is, I really believe passionately in the power of internationalizing product and export. So feel very strongly about that kind of thing.
And actually, we're quite lucky, because there are conventions that exist, like the Berne Convention, to which most countries in the world our signatory, that means that we can enforce copyright without registration in most countries in the world. So that's a really powerful tool. And then I think in terms of intellectual property, registered intellectual property, there's things like the Madrid Protocol. There are systems in place which mean that there's that recognition that it's important for intellectual property to be considered not just in one jurisdiction but across multiple.
I do often think that these international conventions were kind of slipped in under the radar before IP became as big as it is now. I do wonder whether we'd ever get another international Berne convention together, or a new kind of international patent system like the PCT or even Madrid. It's worries me a little bit that maybe that era of international cooperation might be diminishing at the moment, which is not what we need, obviously.
No. Berne Convention's fantastic, though. 3 cheers for whoever organised that.
A political hot potato thrown in at the end by Gwilym. So one of my other jobs on the podcast, other than trying to summarise stuff and ask interesting questions, is to keep us to time, Gwilym, isn't it? And I'm conscious that we're there or thereabouts. We always like to ask our guests whether there are any questions that they haven't feel we've asked or that they've not answered. So are you sat there thinking, wish they'd asked us that one? Any more of the story to tell?
I don't think so. I think I would just say, if anybody's taking a product to market, please at least register trademarks. I believe passionately in the power of a trademark. I know this is a podcast for patent people in the main. And also, if you're registering a patent and a design right hasn't been considered, then design rights are incredibly powerful, particularly online. Jet's a bit of an expert on design rights. I'm not, but that would be my parting comment.
Definitely take out the bit of me being an expert.
Well, you know more about them more eloquently than I do. But design rights are very powerful online. Particularly when you're defending a product, because sometimes if it's page 32, paragraph 6 of a patent that needs to be defended in terms of an infringement, then it may be that the person that you're liaising with doesn't speak the language that the patent was written in, and it's very difficult to explain that. So a design right can be a much easier thing to use in defense of a product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would also be my parting comment would be to really consider the importance of registered designs. While not inexpensive, they are much more affordable than patents. There's also the advantage of a grace period in lots of jurisdictions, including the UK and the EU. The speed of protection is, very quick in comparison to other types of IP. And I would say to really consider, getting professional intellectual property advisors' advice on this. There's lots of opportunities to have a free 30-minute consultation with an IP lawyer. And beyond that, it will be money well spent. If done correctly, registered designs will stand you in good stead.
That's a really good point, and one we don't touch on the podcast often enough, because quite often we don't talk about all strands of IP simultaneously, as we've done today. So our members, SEPA, we provide introductory clinics, we call them, to the world of IP. Those can run 45 minutes to an hour. So exactly what you said there, Jet, that's an opportunity for somebody who's perhaps new to the world of IP, just invented something, just thought of something, to come along. No obligation, no risk of disclosure, no conflict, just an opportunity to talk to a qualified attorney around the sorts of protections that might be available. And it might be that these things aren't well enough known, and most of our members who work in firms will do similar consultations through the firm. So the way into IP doesn't necessarily have to be particularly onerous or expensive. And I think you're right, people need to consider it as soon as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a great little way to end the podcast. But we're not ending the podcast there, because you two don't know this. Gwilym knows it only too well. I have another little job, and that's to, while we're talking, sit here thinking about an ingenious, clever question to finish with, which I'm going to throw at Gwilym first, but then it'll come to you two, and then here very cleverly turn it back on me. So Gwilym, we've been talking a lot about online platforms for buying stuff. I think we all know we're talking kind of like our Amazons and eBays and those kinds of places. What's the most unexpectedly useful or disappointingly not fit for purpose or just joyous thing you've ever bought from an online platform?
That's exciting. It's a bass guitar. It's a bass guitar.
No, you can't go for a bass guitar.
Why can't I go for a bass guitar? That was joyous. You said joyous.
Yeah, but that did exactly what you was expecting it to do, surely.
No, because it made me sound like I could play the bass. It was brilliant. It was a beautiful piece of kit. It made a lovely noise. No, it was joyous. I bought some kind of strange gadgets and avocado stoners and peelers. You know those funny shaped things. That was a big lockdown for me. I did a lot of avocado. That was remarkably versatile within the avocado kind of sphere. Well, it's not really a sphere. Oh God! Right, there you go. I feel like I've nailed that one.
Which of our two victims, our guests, shall I go to? Rachel, how about you?
So I have bought a joyous product this year online, which has transformed my life and my wardrobe. And it's a wee hoover for jumpers that takes away all the little bobbly bits. And I can't tell you how much I love it. I'm going
A debobbler. It's called a debobbler.
A debobbler. It's absolutely marvellous. And it has completely transformed my wardrobe and is about to transform everybody's Christmas. I can't recommend it highly enough, honestly.
Go on then, Jet. You can't do a debobbler, obviously.
No, but I'm with you on that one, Rachel. Everything. I mean, I buy everything from secondhand online marketplaces, and sometimes you do have to still be careful about issues with counterfeits or fakes. But if you're careful, especially if you're avoiding certain brands, you can completely avoid buying new by using the likes of eBay or Vinted, which is really great. Not only are you getting a good bargain, but you're doing your bit for the environment. But we have also seen examples of absolutely horrific things online. So yeah, these are the opposite of what you're asking. So not joyous at all. But yeah, you mentioned some horrific examples at the beginning of the podcast, but we've also seen counterfeit life jackets for children. So there are some pretty horrible things out there.
So we're finished, Gwilym.
No, we're not. You know what you've got to do, Lee. Out of interest.
Unusually this time, I didn't have an answer in advance. So I've had to sit here thinking about it. And I bought probably 5 or 6 years ago, in a moment of boredom. I like tools. Rachel, Jet, I'm a plumber by trade in the dark distant past, and I've never really escaped that sort of like practical desire to do stuff.
He's also never not mentioned it on the podcast. So Lee, that was brilliant because we nearly made
I bought. I never knew whether it would work or not, but it's socket sets that you might use in cars and stuff, like loosening nuts and so on. So I bought this very large socket, and inside it's just got lots of pins, so it fits almost anything. It'll fit a conventional nut, or if you're trying to put one of those like hooks and eyes into a wall, that'll kind of a slot around that. Or if there's something a bit odd, like a half-broken screw or something, it'll fit around that. It's been a game changer for me. It's pretty much my go-to tool first. And it was like 10 quid on Amazon or something like that. Absolutely transformed my life.
You have those for you can get those if you're arthritic for turning taps, can't you?
Yes. Yeah. My dad is a plumber, and he always tells the story that I've never actually checked to see if it's true, but he said that a plumber had the idea to put 2 handles on a children's sippy cup. So yeah, he always uses that as an example of why plumbers are brilliant.
No idea. Possibly. Oh, thank you both for coming on and telling the Snapdragon story, which is obviously your stories. Thank you, Gwilym, for being a genial host once more. And probably should end the podcast just by saying to people, if they've listened to this podcast and found it interesting and engaging, and why wouldn't you? It was a great story. Then give us a little recommendation or leave us a comment, and then that'll help other people find the podcast. That's it. We're done.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege to take part, and lovely to meet you both. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.